your future town hall. Tonight we have candidates vying to be the next Baltimore City State's Attorney. These candidates are answering to us and to you. We're bringing this event to you from the Bilingual Christian Church of Baltimore. We invited incumbent City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby along with Democrat candidate Ivan Bates to participate in the conversation tonight. However, both have refused to participate. We do understand that there was a loss in the family of Marilyn Mosby, and we send our condolences to the loved ones of Marilyn and her family. Now tonight we also have candidates who are here to join us, and Ivan Bates, one of those candidates who is not participating, did send us a statement to explain his absence this evening. He responded to our invitation saying, in part, quote, "I made myself available to participate in debates with the incumbent to respectfully share our ideas for the city, and she dismissed the idea on 2 occasions. Therefore, I coordinated a way to the voters to talk to them directly through a series of telephone town halls. The first of those town halls via phone will be held in May." Meanwhile, we do have 2 candidates who are here to discuss some of the growing problems as the crime crisis rages on in Baltimore City. Let me begin by introducing those. We have Democrat candidate Dhruv Vignaraja. He earned his law degree from Harvard Law. He spent time as federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office and chief of major investigations within the state's attorney's office. He went on to become Deputy Attorney General for the state of Maryland and now is a CEO of a community development financial institution, Capital Plus. We also have independent candidate Roya Hanna. She earned her law degree at the University of Maryland. She began her career at the National Center for Community Prosecution and Gun Violence Prevention, working with local prosecutors to reduce gun violence in their communities. She went on to become a prosecutor in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office and now works as a defense attorney. The primary election is now going to be held in July 19th, and the incumbent City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby has recently announced her intention to run for re-election. During a community meeting a few weeks ago in Roland Park, there were some tense moments as some community members there asked the incumbent City State's Attorney Mosby about the current federal indictment that she is facing. Let's take a look at some of those intense moments. State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby there refusing to take responsibility for some of the crime crises that we're seeing play out. She said she's built for this. We know that that is the theme of her recent re-election campaign right now. I want to begin, let's dive right into some of these. I want to ask both of you this question, but we'll start with you, Thuru. The fact that she's refusing to take responsibility for her role in this conversation when it comes to community violence with those members during the Roland Park community meeting, she's not here discussing this tonight with members of the community. What does that tell you about her ability to do this job and her role in accepting what's happening?
Mackenzie, first and foremost, good evening, everyone. I want to start by echoing your condolences to Ms. Mosby and her family. I know all of our thoughts and prayers are with her and her loved ones. Look, this is an incredibly important moment in Baltimore City's history. We face a violent crime crisis, the likes of which we have never seen. Literally, it is worse today than it has ever been. And if there's ever a moment when we need a chance to see and touch and talk to our elected officials, it is now. They are required to be here because you deserve answers to these basic questions. Why is the crime so high? What's not working? Is there a break between the police and the prosecutors? Is there a strategy change in mind on the horizon? If they're not here to answer those questions, for whatever reason, I understand how difficult it must be to defend a record where we have soaring murders, soaring shootings, carjackings that are out of control. The headlines have been littered for the last 8 years with those slain on the streets of Baltimore. And we all, our hearts go to those people that families have been broken up. But if you're not here to answer those questions, if you're not here at election time to face the music, to face the people, then you know what's going to happen when and if she were to get reelected, which is she'd disappear again.
Ms. Hanna, what do you think about the fact that she is refusing to talk about this and accept her responsibility and role in the conversation when it comes to the crime in Baltimore City? She's not here to talk about this with constituents. How would you handle that, or what does that strike you?
Well, you know, the state's attorney is the chief law enforcement officer of the city. They are responsible for everything that is public safety related, not only just the functioning of the state prosecutor's office, but in working with the police and helping to guide the police on how resources should be directed, and working with the community to engage them in the process of creating a safe community for each and every one of us in Baltimore City. And the fact that the state's attorney is not here engaging with the community, and the fact that the other candidate is not here willing to engage with the community, is just a sign of the level of disrespect that they have shown each and every one of us.
In order for us to get through as many questions tonight as we possibly can from myself and members of the community, I want to see if we can keep our answers to about 90 seconds, 2 minutes perhaps. So given this, she also says that her role in the criminal justice system, she should only be judged based on what happens inside the courtroom, not necessarily what happens among the crime rates in the streets of Baltimore. Do you agree with that?
No. I mean, quite simply, no. She should be judged on what is happening in our community. But even if you want to just look at what's happening with the crime rates and the conviction rates in the court, I would love to do that. But she won't give us the answers to those questions. She touts this 90% conviction rate, which we all know is false. She dismisses half of the cases. And, you know, on Monday, we filed a lawsuit against the state's attorney's office demanding that she produce the accurate records to show us what happened under Greg Bernstein and under Ms. Jessamine, her predecessors, so that the voters have the right to judge for themselves what is really happening. Give us the data, let us make our own assessment, and don't try to hide it. That is not your job as state's attorney to willfully flaunt the system and to hide your conviction rates.
You know who else thought that the state's attorney ought to be evaluated based on the crime on the streets? Marilyn Mosby, 8 years ago. Literally, when she ran for election 8 years ago, she claimed that crime was out of control and that she was going to become state's attorney to do something about it. And then she got into office and forgot all the things that she had said on the campaign trail. That's a problem. It's disrespectful to you, it insults your intelligence to think that the state's attorney, the chief law enforcement official in the city, is not responsible for a crime. If it's not her, who is it? If it's not the person who's responsible for partnering with the police, partnering with the federal agencies, building cases, prosecuting those cases in the courtroom, then whose responsibility is it? But on top of that, as Roy had said just a moment ago, let's judge her based on the things that are happening in the courtroom. We know that of felony cases over the past 8 years, she has dropped about 40% of those cases after she indicted them. That's not a case that the streets are making, that the cops are making on the street. That's a case that her prosecutors are indicting, and then on average 6 months later, whether it's carjacking, shootings, murders, gun cases, she's dropping them. And then she takes the remainder of those cases and she pleads them out. You all remember Luther Trent, the case where a person was charged with 3 counts of attempted murder and arson. She pled that case out to time served over the objection of the victims, and she counts that as a win. That's a problem.
You bring that case up. And I know that both of you were very involved in the fallout of that after the conversation that we all saw and took place. But going back to the transparency and accountability from within the state's attorney's office, because I believe that this really relates to the trust that is built among members of the community. If elected, would you publish all of the data from the office, including cases dropped, including all of the plea deals and everything, the prosecutions, the wins, the losses, all of it? Would you publish that data?
Absolutely. Let me be clear about how important this is. The data that Ms. Mosby is declining to share, the data that Roya is seeking to obtain through a lawsuit, it's literally the data that happens inside of a courtroom. If somebody had time to go into a courtroom and sit there every day, they could take down the results of all the things that happened. We don't have that kind of time. We're busy. We have families to take care of, work to do, to put food on the table, but the public still deserves that information. As state's attorney, every case that is indicted by my office, you would be able to track it online. At the end of each week, we would share with you what happened that week, what happened with carjackings, what happened with robberies and burglaries, what happened with the shootings and the murders. How many cases did we drop and why did we drop them? What were the plea deals and what were the exact sentences and what happened in the courtroom in the cases that went to trial? That's what you need to know to evaluate fairly whether the state's attorney is doing a good job or a bad job. So not only is it difficult to evaluate whether they're doing a good job when they're not here. It also makes it impossible to evaluate whether they're doing a good job or a bad job because they don't tell you what they're doing.
Roya, would you comment on that?
You know, we've seen with case search that they've taken a lot of that information offline. They've taken down cases that are dismissed. They no longer have the count, so you can't see the maximum counts anymore. You know, I had a case a couple weeks ago. It was a homicide case. It was charged homicide and conspiracy to commit murder. The defendant was found guilty of assault second degree, and the state's attorney's office counts that as a win. So we don't know, if you just go and look at those records, what actually the nature of the crime versus what they're actually being sentenced to. That information is invaluable. And like Mr. Victoraccia said, the Luther Trent case is the epitome of what is really happening day to day in the state's attorney's office, and that is why we work to bring that case out.
We also we've done some work on finding out how, looking at the level of turnover in the state's attorney's office, because we've seen high numbers of prosecutors leave the office. We know that she just swore in a few more prosecutors in the office. But Roya, why do you think people are leaving in such high levels? And is that a problem given the level of crime and cases that this office is responsible for handling?
Absolutely. You know, when Ms. Mosby came into office, she had about 217 prosecutors that she inherited from the previous administration. To my count, there's about 43, 45 of those individuals left. That means everyone else in the office has less than 8 years experience. We see that every single day. You know, prosecutors are going and trying homicides with less than 5 years experience. They just don't know what they don't know, and they can't try those cases effectively. We see that in the convictions, we see that in the losses, but we also see that by overcharging cases that shouldn't be charged, by making unreasonable plea offers. That is something that has to turn itself around. You know, I talk to prosecutors every single day in my career, and what they are telling me is that the office is very poorly run, that they're not given the support and encouragement and training to actually be able to do their jobs. They want to be great prosecutors. They want to serve the citizens of Baltimore, but because Ms. Mosby doesn't have the experience, she is not able to adequately train them. She has never tried a homicide. The other candidate has maybe tried one. I have more trial experience than anybody in this race, and that is why I'm running for office.
How would you make the office more inviting, or how would you turn that around? How do you fix this problem given the level of, as you just described, underprepared prosecutors?
I think there's a lot of things that can be done. You know, I think what prosecutors feel is that there's a tremendous amount of pressure without any resources. And I think if you help relieve the pressure and recognize young prosecutors are going to make mistakes. That's why we keep them handling lower level cases before they are actually moved up and actually are ready to handle homicides. We have to provide them with the resources that they need and the support and encouragement that they need.
How would you incentivize or make working at the state's attorney's office more beneficial, or a better place to work?
Yeah, let me start by saying, and Roya, I bet, will agree with me, being a prosecutor is the best job in the world. People literally dream of being a prosecutor when they go to law school. They watch Law and Order growing up, and they think that would be fun. And then they go to law school, and it turns out that there's a handful of jobs in the world that look like what television looks like, and being a prosecutor is one of them. There was a legendary prosecutor in New York City, Robert Morgenthau, and over the course of a 40-year career, he built what is considered the greatest prosecutor's office in American history. He would go into local law schools, the best trial law schools in the nation. He'd go to local law firms, the best law firms in the nation, and he'd say, folks, I want you to come work for me. You're going to work 100 hours a week and every weekend. I'm going to pay you a dime on the dollar. But you're going to learn more about trying a case in 4 years than you will for the rest of your career. And you will do more good in the next 4 years than you will for the rest of your life. And it worked. It wasn't a pitch that worked on everyone, but it brought the right people to the office. It brought the people that cared about public service. It brought the people that wanted to be prosecutors into a place where they could fight crime. And here's the thing, guys. New York City isn't got them anymore. Baltimore is. We have a chance to use the tragedy that is unfolding in our backyard as a lightning rod to draw the greatest talent in the nation to the state's attorney's office in Baltimore City.
Transparency is paramount the ability for the public to learn what's happening inside government offices. We have filed several public records requests to the state's attorney's office. One example is we tried to get a copy of Marilyn Mosby's work calendar, and her office tried to charge us $156,000 to get copies of her work calendar. So if elected, would the office under your administration be more open to public records requests, and would you charge the public or members of the press for information that was gathered using tax dollars?
I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. The idea that it would cost $156,000 to tell you what my calendar is, I can open up my phone and show you what my calendar is. That should not be hard for the elected public officials in Baltimore City. By the way, her calendar, her schedule, her travel is all paid for by you. It's not my schedule, it's your schedule. It's what I'm doing on your guys' behalf. You're entitled to know that. But don't take my word for it. Also look at the results of what we have done. Just a couple years ago, we put on the internet a publication of 1,001 homicides that happened in 2017, 18, and 19. Every murder that happened in Baltimore City, we tracked it down and we put it on there. Turns out only 225 of them had resulted even in an arrest. And of those 225 cases, that's 22%, by the way, for the math majors like my dad in the room, that's 22%. That means 800 murders never resulted even in an arrest. And for each of those murders that did result in an arrest, we published online for all to see the plea deal, the result in court, every single thing that a member of the public should want to see. That's what the state's attorney should be promising. That's what the state's attorney should be delivering.
Information to the public if someone submits a public records request without charging fees such as $156,000.
Absolutely. One thing that people may not know is that under prior administrations, they did not have an attorney handling MPIA requests. Ms. Mosby is the first prosecutor in Baltimore's history to have an attorney specifically designed just to deny those requests. That is unconscionable. Her change to this office has been to deny the public transparency. We have to change that. Go back to the old system, provide people with information they need. And again, that is why we filed the lawsuit, because voters deserve information. It is our right as citizens of this town to know what is going on in our government.
If I could just amplify Roy's point, that means you guys are paying for a lawyer to block you from getting information in her office. That's crazy.
Let me just say that if either of you are elected and win, we'll hold you to that to make sure that our public records requests are fulfilled.
If I know one thing about Mackenzie Frost, it is that she's absolutely going to do that.
You brought up travel, and we have to ask, there was an investigation that Marilyn Mosby herself asked for. She asked the Office of Inspector General in Baltimore City to conduct an investigation into the city's travel policy that found that she was away 144 days from the office within a 2-year time frame. If elected, how much time could we expect to see you away from the office in Baltimore City?
In my first year, I would imagine that I'm not leaving Baltimore unless crime has come dramatically down. My job is to be in Baltimore. Look, we all have families, we all have loved ones that we want to spend time with, but this is the height of public service. You are asking to be the DA, the state's attorney in the most violent city in America. If you want a break, if you want a vacation, if you want 2-week trips to Portugal and Kenya on somebody else's dollar, find another job. This is not the job for you in that case.
I've done all my traveling when I was little, growing up in Haiti, Samoa, Tanzania, Czechoslovakia, Morocco, Canada, and Israel, so I don't intend to be doing very much, but I guess the question that I would ask Mr. Vigdaraja is, while you may be in Baltimore, what if there are other job opportunities that you choose to seek? What would happen to the state's attorney's office then?
Look, at the end of the day, my commitment has always been to Baltimore. I've been a federal prosecutor, a local prosecutor, deputy attorney general for the state of Maryland, all here in Baltimore. It's my hometown. My dad taught at Edmondson and Douglas and Southern and Western. My mom taught at Poly and Morgan State. This is our home. This is what I call home. This is what I will fight for the rest of my life. And if you look over the course of my career, I do the job until the job is done. However long it takes,
And I want to thank everyone who took the time to fill out the form online or wrote their questions down here tonight. This one comes from a police officer, and it says, we'll start with Theroux. How do you think your years of experience as a prosecutor has helped prepare you for potentially becoming the top prosecutor in Baltimore City?
Look, experience matters. This could very well be the general election debate in a few months, right? Roya Hanna and Theroux Vignarajah. And we're going to agree to disagree about some number of things, but here's the thing about Roya. She's a seasoned homicide prosecutor. She's tried cases in the Baltimore City courtroom. That matters. Those are the kinds of prosecutors we need in the office. Those are the kinds of prosecutors we need leading the office. Now, I was a federal prosecutor, a city prosecutor, deputy attorney general. I know how to work with federal agencies. I know how to work with local cops. I know how to try cases at all different levels. And I bring, I think, not just a record of experience in the city state's attorney's office, but also commitment to say crime is the defining challenge of Baltimore. And if we don't solve the problem of crime, everything else is harder to do.
If elected, what qualities would you seek in selecting deputy state's attorneys and division chiefs of the office? And would you or your leadership team carry a caseload?
I think I would carry a caseload mainly because I like to know what's going on in the courtroom. I like to be there. I like to be able to help supervise and train my prosecutors better. As far as qualities for chief deputy or deputies and division heads, I think that the most important thing that you can have in those people are people who are going to be honest, who are going to work with our young prosecutors and give them the skills that they need and make the tough choices. You know, so often you're presented with cases that either shouldn't be charged or need some work, or you need to make a decision about filing life without the possibility of parole, all of those things, and you need attorneys who are going to be able to make those choices. That is absolutely something that you need to do. And I think, you know, given the fact that I have had twice as much experience as even Mr. Vignarajah in prosecuting cases, I understand how essential experience is. I haven't had the luxury of being able to handpick my cases in the federal system or in MIU. I took what was given to me and I worked to make it better. And that is why I never lost a murder trial as a prosecutor, because I made those cases better. And that is what you have to train each and every one of those prosecutors to do, is to strengthen those cases so that we can ensure the certainty of conviction for individuals who need to be incarcerated.
I want to pivot and talk about specific crimes that we're seeing across Baltimore City, and this is another viewer question. Theroux, we'll start here, and I want to get your take on this as well, Roya, because I think this is important for everyone to hear. Theroux, what do you plan to do about carjackings? I know you recently talked about a plan for that, and we're seeing carjackings on the rise in Baltimore. We just had an apparent carjacking where a Johns Hopkins doctor, a trauma surgeon, was shot on his way to work. How do you handle this?
Look, carjackings are literally out of control. We have had a 70% spike in carjackings this year compared to last year. And last year, we had the highest per capita rate of carjackings in the country. It's really an epidemic that is unfolding in our city. We unveiled just a couple of weeks ago a 5-part plan to address carjackings. Number one, carjackings are one of the few categories of crimes over which there is federal jurisdiction of every case. So we ought to send a clear signal that every carjacking that happens in Baltimore City is going to be subject to automatic federal review. Number two, and that's going to send a signal, right? Number two, we're going to have dedicated prosecutors in each of the 9 police districts that focus on carjackings and carjackings alone. There's enough of them, unfortunately, that each prosecutor in each district would have a full docket just handling those cases. But that means they can coordinate, they can collaborate, they can build best practices. We're also going to ensure that there are financial subsidies. Just like State Farm offers a lower insurance rate if you get a beacon service, a GPS tracking service in your car, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to call it the Track Jack system. Fourth, we're going to ensure that there's a Jack alert, just like an Amber alert, just like a Silver alert. If there is a carjacking, that license plate will get displayed not only to the police, but also to the public. And finally, and this is really, really important, we have to do a public education campaign to make sure that you know what to do to reduce the risk of carjackings, but also to reduce the risk of god-awful things happening in the event of a carjacking.
Become something that your office could do in terms of messaging, sending out the signal to potential criminals in the city that your office would not tolerate, people who commit these crimes?
I think what a lot of people don't know is that most of the carjackings in this city are committed by our youth. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They are not committed by 30-year-olds, right? And so we have to address the juvenile crime in this city. And we have to address it through innovative ways. We have to reduce the school-to-prison pipeline by addressing things like truancy. The fact of the matter is, people are joyriding, but in this very, very violent manner, because cars are harder to steal these days. So that is what they're doing. But you know, we can't let this go unchecked, but I don't think that the federal government needs to involve themselves in everything. I think Baltimore can handle its business. If you have grown-ups in leadership, we can handle what we need to do. And we can make sure that our youth are redirected at an early stage. We can make sure that our youth are not just funneled into the federal system and sent off to Nebraska.
Let's talk about policy though, because we know that this is, it sounds like policy changes would come if either of you were elected, given the carjacking incident. We've also seen open-air drug markets become such a problem in Baltimore City on the heels of the policy shift and announced by Marilyn Mosby to no longer prosecute some of these low-level offenses or offenses that she has deemed low-level, like drug possession. Would those specific policies continue under your administration if elected? Guru?
We have to rescind those policies. Look, a prosecutor has to use their judgment in deciding which cases to pursue. That's always been the case. It will certainly be the case now. We're not going to prosecute and take to trial every loitering and trespass case. But you don't go out to the world and broadcast that certain crimes are no longer criminal. That is not okay. It sends the wrong message, and in my experience, petty offenses, what we describe as low-level offenses, rarely stays confined to low-level offenses. They grow into bigger and bigger things because you send the message to the criminal element that there are not consequences for their conduct. We have to rescind the blanket policy and return to the days when prosecutors use their judgment about which cases to pursue and which cases to plead out.
I believe in the Constitution. I believe that the legislature makes the law and the executive branch enforces it. And the fact that Ms. Mosby has shirked her responsibilities to enforce the law is unconscionable. The fact of the matter is, everyone in Baltimore deserves quality of life, right? They're called quality of life offenses for a reason. And we deserve to be able to walk down the street without seeing the paraphernalia and without seeing all the other remnants of low-level crime. But also, we have to remember that the users are suffering. And the fact of the matter is we've had a 12% increase in overdose deaths. So by not enforcing the drug laws, we are condemning people to die. And that is a problem that we all need to address. We need to get them into treatment and to provide them the services that they need.
So would you keep the policies in place or would you remove them?
I would remove them.
You both mentioned Luther Trent, and I want to dive deeper into that because he spoke with me personally about, he explained how he went to his ex-girlfriend's house, lit the house on fire, why he did it. He was out free from a plea deal offered by and accepted by Marilyn Mosby's office. How many other Luther Trent situations like that do you think exist from plea deals made by her office?
I mean, let's be clear about this. Roya actually is the person who first saw this injustice take place. I was able to engage with the victims and help them, with Roya's assistance, to make sure that some justice was delivered in that case. But what if Roya had not seen that case? What if I had not gotten involved? What if Mackenzie Frost had not interviewed the defendant? You know where he'd be? He'd be on the streets. So how many more of those cases are there? It could be hundreds, it could be thousands. Part of the problem is we don't know. Because we have no transparency into what happens in that office. We have no idea what's happening in those cases. The cases that get dropped, they don't get included in the conviction rate. The cases that get pled out to time served, she still counts that as a win. So if you just see the total number, the 92% conviction rate, and you don't hear about the cases that get dropped, you don't hear about the plea deals that are struck every day, we have a problem. I think it could be thousands of Luther Trents walking the street, knowing in the back of their mind that they should be behind bars, but happily walking like peacocks down the street saying, I got away with another crime in Baltimore City.
Roya, do you think that someone who was at one time facing 3 attempted homicide charges served less than 6 months behind bars, is that a win?
No, it is a win for the defendant, certainly. And I think, on that tape, the defendant was overjoyed. He said, "You don't have to tell me twice, I'll happily take that plea. That's what I want. Absolutely, my lawyer's great." So it was absolutely a win for him. But what struck me about that case, and the reason why I wanted to bring that case forward, was the victim in that case. Yes. She gave one of the most powerful, moving statements that I have ever heard. And so I reached out to her and I contacted her and I helped, figure out what the law was and how ways that we can overturn that, because victims have to be heard. And so often in this city, they're not. And so often in this city, they just get frustrated and go away. They don't have the courage, or they don't have me randomly on the Zoom court that day to bring this case out. And we need to do more to help our victims. We need to have a state's attorney who's willing to be the voice of the victim.
There's one more piece to this. Roy is exactly right. This is a victim who did everything that we ask of her. We beg people to come forward and cooperate. We beg people to come forward and have the courage and bravery to stand up to the perpetrator of crime in a court of law. She did that. She took that risk. She had that courage. And what did we do with her case? We called her the night before and said, "By the way, the person who tried to burn your house down 6 months ago is going to be home tomorrow." That's literally what happened in this case. Thank goodness that justice prevailed. We were able to secure a just result. He's now facing a plea deal. Marilyn Mosby's new plea deal, 22 years in prison. That is what should have happened the first time, not only because people got involved and the cameras were on the case.
Do you think that these cases erode trust in the public? We've heard this from other city leaders about working with the community and the importance of community members speaking up if they see crimes, speaking up if they have any information to help solve a crime, or if they've been a victim of a crime themselves. How can the state's attorney's office expect more people to cooperate if they see cases like this continue?
And McKinsey, we hear these stories all the time. We see the mayor, we see the police commissioner come out at some press conference after some horrific murder and beg the community to come forward. They beg them. They say, "If you know something, come forward. If it's your boy, come forward." We beg them to come forward. And then I hear stories, I'm sure Roya does as well, that after they come forward, we dishonor the risk that they take. We insult what they sat to time served. We know what a just result is. We all do. We have an intuitive sense that if you commit a carjacking, you need to go to prison. If you were loitering, you don't need to go to prison for 5 years, but you can't just do that every day, anytime you want. If you sell drugs, there's got to be some consequences. If you are engaging in crimes that are because you're a victim of addiction or a victim of trafficking, then you need help. And it's our job to get you that help. There are just results in all of these cases, but in order for that justice to be delivered, we have to honor the risks that the people take. The witnesses, the victims, the businesses, all those people that are prepared to work with us, we have to honor their commitment too.
How do you rebuild the state's attorney's office and members of the community? How do you do that?
By making sure that the people who need to go to jail, by strengthening the cases to ensure the certainty of conviction. As part of my plan, I intend to expand the initial review unit so that the prosecutors work with the police and make those cases stronger, so that you have contact with the victims and witnesses at the very outset. When I was in homicide, I would go down in the middle of the night and I would meet with the victims' families, with the witnesses, and having that relationship from the very beginning and them knowing who they're going to call was essential in helping them not recant. We have a huge problem with witness intimidation in this city, and we have to address witness intimidation. The state's attorney there's been a couple of witness intimidation cases where basically they have gotten probation. I've got more time for witness intimidation than any prosecutor in Baltimore's history, because I know how to take these cases seriously, and I know that publishing things like that and letting the community know that if you have a problem with somebody threatening you, I will take care of it and I will make sure that that never happens again, is something that absolutely we can do. And also, I think we need to do other things to provide more services for the victims who come forward. Something as simple as getting them a Ring camera, just so that they have that added security and that we can know as law enforcement if anything happens. It will expand our network of cameras and enable us to catch more crimes.
Let me ask you this, because building stronger cases inherently comes with working closer with Baltimore police and investigators. But we've seen a rift between BPD sometimes and Marilyn Mosby and her office. Do you think it's possible to restore trust and bring stronger cases if that relationship isn't stronger?
I don't think that Ms. Mosby will ever be able to repair the relationship between the state's attorney's office and the Baltimore Police Department. We need new leadership. That is the only way that that relationship is going to be repaired. I grew up with working in the state's attorney's office and working with all the detectives who are now in leadership positions. I think that once that change is made, it will be fine.
Do you think the messaging that we hear often from Marilyn Mosby and other people in her office towards BPD officers has caused that rift to get worse and make that relationship harder to rebuild or reconnect and therefore make those cases stronger?
She has characterized the police as the enemy instead of a partner. It's a problem. Criminals need to be treated like criminals, and cops need to be treated like heroes. That doesn't mean that there aren't bad cops out there that need to be brought to justice, but it does mean that there are hundreds, thousands of officers that take their lives in their hands, they kiss their children goodbye, and they go into the most dangerous city in America, and they put their lives on the line. We ought to honor that. Over the past 8 years, we've tried to recruit more police. Each year we get some new police, we lose some police. Over the past 8 years during Marilyn Mosby's tenure, our net loss of police is 500 officers. We have 500 fewer officers total in the Baltimore Police Department today than we did 8 years ago. You can't do the community policing. You can't do the detective work. You can't do the deterrent work that a police department is supposed to do when each and every year you're hundreds and hundreds of officers down from where you need to be.
We've heard this similar rhetoric from other members, elected leaders in Baltimore City, from Baltimore City Council. You've been pretty outspoken and sometimes critical of the policies from Mayor Brendan Scott. If elected, do you plan to work on rebuilding any relationships with people inside City Hall to help create that united front to help curb crime in the city?
Look, if people think I'm going to rebuild relationships by being nice to everyone, that's not what relationships are built about. It's built on mutual trust. It's built on mutual respect. If the mayor is doing something that I am disappointed with, I'm going to share that with him. Sometimes that will be in private, sometimes that will be in public. And I expect him to do the same thing of me. When we announced our campaign, Commissioner Kevin Davis echoed what other police commissioners have done, which is to endorse our campaign by saying this is a person who knows how to work with cops. Kevin Davis, our former police commissioner, said, "I've never heard of cops talk so highly of a prosecutor than they did of Thuruvik Raja." That wasn't because I bought him lunch every day and gave him a pat on the back. It's because I respected them enough to tell them when they did a good job, and I respected them enough to tell them when they did a bad job. That's what prosecutors are supposed to do.
In the city to help foster that united front and therefore encourage other people to come forward and help you prosecute the criminals in the city?
Well, I think it's not just about building relationships with elected officials. When I worked at the National Center for Community Prosecution and Gun Violence Prevention, what we did was we went around the country and we trained prosecutors on how to work with their community, how to use the resources of the community to achieve the objectives of public safety, to identify all of the stakeholders and to bring them in. So it's not just the elected officials, because honestly, they're going to sit in their little city hall when they bother to open it and do whatever they do. I don't so much care about working with them. I care about working with the community and working with the nonprofits. We have so many nonprofits in this community and people who are every day out in their community trying to make things better. Those are the people who I want to work with.
Speaking of nonprofits and working in the community, recently we heard that the mayor is announcing more expansion plans for community intervention programs such as Safe Streets. We've been investigating the Safe Streets program for weeks now. Do you think that program should expand, and do you think that it's working?
I think the results are out. I mean, I believe you guys keep saying that it has not proven to be effective. I do think that violence intervention programs do work, but it has to be more organized. It has to have the right people in place. And, we have to vet those people and make sure that they are really accomplishing the things that we need them to do.
Have you guys heard the mayor say, men lie, women lie, but numbers don't? You guys have heard that line that he sometimes says? Well, the numbers in this case don't lie. In some of the Safe Streets districts, crime is down. In some of the Safe Streets districts, crime is up. If you pick any 10 locations in Baltimore, any 10 neighborhoods in Baltimore, crime's going to be up in some, crime's going to be down in others. We need a careful accounting of where the money is going and what is being done to make sure that we're getting the right people to be violence interventionists, and we're also making sure that we protect them. We've had multiple Safe Streets people indicted by federal prosecutors. We've also had multiple Safe Streets workers killed on the streets of Baltimore. We're not doing a service to them by not making sure that we're protecting them. So if we're going to invest, what, $10 million more into something, let's make sure that we're not pouring good money after bad.
And the importance of hearing from the people who are here to show up and get some answers. This one goes back to some of the line of questioning we were just talking about regarding trust and working with the Baltimore Police Department. This is coming from, it says, as a resident of Baltimore City, I'm having a hard time trusting the Baltimore City Police. How are you going to bring integrity back to the department?
Mandatory minimums and don't effectively reduce crime. And we need to recognize that the people who come into the criminal justice system are just that. They're people, and sometimes they are good people who've committed a mistake, and sometimes they are bad people. As far as mandatory minimums are concerned, we need to look at the individual to decide if those are appropriate.
I think there is one thing to really be clear about with these stiffer penalties. Stiffer penalties matter if prosecutors are doing their job. If you're not charging cases, the laws don't matter. If you're dropping cases, the mandatory minimums don't matter. If you're pleading cases out, like we did in Luther Trent, the mandatory minimums and the stiffer penalties don't matter. The only way the laws are effective, the only way this debate about what the laws should be matters, is if prosecutors are actually enforcing and prosecuting the law. Until that happens, we can debate until we're blue in the face about these laws, but we need the prosecutor to do the job. We need cops to arrest people, we need prosecutors to prosecute, or Baltimore City is going to continue to go the way that it's always gone.
Let me ask you this, how many people do you think are on the streets of Baltimore right now who are responsible for carjackings, non-fatal shootings, homicides, drug possession, drug dealing, as a result of the policies coming out of the current city state's attorney's office?
There are, unfortunately, I am sad to report, literally thousands of violent criminals on the streets of Baltimore that ought to be behind bars. That's not a guess. That's not speculation. It's based on what we know. In one of Marilyn Mosby's early years, when the numbers still were reported, there were about 41,000 cases that were filed in circuit court. Ms. Mosby dropped 40% of those cases. That means tens of thousands of people that were charged in circuit court had their cases dropped and they were back on the streets. They were back on the streets after trying to kill someone by burning their house down. They were back on the streets after having robbed someone or carjacked someone or having done some crime, and that means that they got the message that they could commit a crime in Baltimore City without any consequences. And that's the message they've held on to ever since.
Of people who are responsible for some of the most violent crimes in Baltimore City walking the streets right now?
Absolutely. What we've seen is that Marilyn Mosby has about 50% less cases and 50% less felonies that are being charged. And it's the felonies that really matter. And that reduction is because they are not making arrests for low-level crimes. So often, they go to arrest somebody for trespassing or loitering or whatnot, and they find that that person has a gun. And then they're able to connect that gun to something else. That is why not arresting people for these quality of life crimes really and truly matters, is we miss things. And if we're missing it, there's nothing we can do to save our city. We need the police to actually be able to enforce the laws.
Now let's talk about the current government update hanging over the city state's attorney's head right now. We know that there's another hearing this week she will attend. A recent Fox 45 News on-air survey shows 97% of the viewers who participated in this survey said that they don't trust Marilyn Mosby or her husband, City Council President Nick Mosby, to do their jobs. This question comes from another viewer. It's directed at Marilyn Mosby, but she is not here participating in this discussion, so I'll ask it to both of you. Should Ms. Mosby resign given the indictment that she's facing right now?
Look, Unfortunately, Marilyn Mosby is not the first politician in Baltimore City to be charged federally. When Catherine Pugh was charged federally, in fact, when she was under investigation, I called for her resignation. When Darrell D'Souza was charged with federal crimes, I called for his resignation. I take no pleasure in it, but your office and this city requires your undivided attention. Your family and your defense team require your undivided attention. You can't be a servant to both of those masters. You can't do both of those jobs. For the sake of her city and for the sake of her defense team, she ought to have resigned a few months ago.
Need her to do. She is not guiding her prosecutors. She is not providing the moral leadership that that office requires. You know, currently, within the past 6 months, there have been 3 prosecutors that have been charged with crimes. That is unheard of. That has never happened before, and that is because Ms. Mosby cannot adequately guide her people. She does not adequately manage her people, and that is the situation that we're in. She needs to resign if she cannot do the job. She has shown very little interest in doing the job by spending more time in Florida than she does in Baltimore, and we need somebody who's going to do the work in Baltimore.
Really quickly, here, you both are prosecutors. You've read the indictment through and through. We know there are 4 charges, 2 perjury, 2 false statements on a mortgage application. Do you think her defense case right now is legitimate, or do you think the case brought by the prosecution is legitimate? Because she is claiming that it is racially and personally and politically motivated. Roya, quickly.
I believe that the federal government is going to win that case.
Look, she enjoys a presumption of innocence, and the verdict in her federal case will come, but the verdict on her performance is already in, and things are out of control. And I want to be very clear. I served in that office. You should go and take a look. Find the last public official who was charged with federal crimes in Baltimore or anywhere in this country where they got acquitted. The result is that she has vastly underestimated the intelligence of the people of Baltimore and overestimated the ability of her defense team to fool a federal jury.
I want to go to this one, another viewer question. It says, will you be more accessible to the media? I didn't write this, it says it right here, especially than the current prosecutor is right now.
Look, I have come to every town hall that I've been invited to. I have answered every question I've ever You want to run a campaign like you're going to run the office. Your job is to ask tough questions, and you ask tough questions of me, you ask tough questions of everyone. My job is to show up and answer them. So yes, I will absolutely be just as accessible as I have been today than when I am in office.
Roya, will you think help restore trust and rebuild some of that trust if the current state's attorney would answer questions and be more accessible to the members of the media?
Yes, and I think the fact that neither she nor Mr. Bates are here speaks volumes. It shows a certain level of disrespect to the community, and it shows what we can expect if either of them remain or become state's attorney in the next election.
And it's not just that Roy and I don't enjoy debating empty chairs. It's because so many of the issues that we have come up with today, they need to answer. I don't have the answers for why things are going so badly. I don't know the answer to why prosecutors are leaving the office or cases are being dropped or Luther Trent plea deals are being struck. The only person who can answer those questions is Marilyn Mosby. She's also the only person who's not here.
Now, I want to, we're running out of time, but I feel like this question really sums up the conversation that we've had. It says, my mother worked until she retired at 65. She's lived in Sandtown, Winchester for 50 years. What would you say to her to make her feel more safe as she walks down the street in her own community?
It's not what I'm going to say, it's what I'm going to do. In 69 months, you are going to start seeing dramatic results in the tone and tenor and performance and results from the state's attorney's office in Baltimore City. Talk is cheap. It's easy to issue platitudes during a campaign, but like Roya, I was a prosecutor at the federal, state, and local level. I'm proud of the work that I did in the trenches with my sleeves rolled up in partnership with police in service of the community. And what we have done my entire career, I'm going to do as state's attorney. JusticeForBaltimore.com. We need your support. We need your donations.
Who has actually done the work. And, you know, I spent more time prosecuting murders and shootings than any of the other candidates, any of them. And the fact of the matter is, that's what we need. Homicides are at an all-time high, shootings are at an all-time high. We need somebody who knows how to prosecute those cases through and through, who has come up against every single possible configuration of facts and can get the job done. And so what I would say to Grandma is help is on the way. I'm going to be prosecutor in January, and we'll get it done.
Tonight, the primary election, July 19th. The general is in November. Again, we invited both incumbent Marilyn Mosby and Democrat candidate Ivan Bates to participate in this conversation, but we saw who was on stage tonight. Thank you to the church for allowing us to have this here, and thank you for everyone who came out, wrote your questions, and we will continue to hold elected and potential elected leaders accountable. Have a great night.